The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is You're Only Human.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. I am here with Kelly Kapic in the studio, and Kelly and I have just met. As you know, I often pre-interview people and know a little bit more about their background, but we're just doing this live. I'm excited to have met him, and it's a little bit of twist on our format, but it'll work out just fine. So I'm going to let Kelly introduce himself with his credentials. I mean, I do know about him. I've seen his books. We definitely want this gentleman on the show, and you're going to want to learn about him and hear what he has to say. Here we go. Kelly, welcome to the studio. Tell us a little bit about your background. I love it.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Background's always hard. I'm born and raised in Northern California, and my wife comes from Southern. I'm an early 1972 kid, and I was raised in a Roman Catholic home, youngest of three boys. And by the time I was in elementary school, I had stopped. Pretty much all of us, except my dad, had stopped going to church. And then my middle school years were kind of like people's college years. They, as ridiculous as it sounds in terms of the partying, it was all there. This was back in 16 Candles, all those movies, right? I was just trying to live it as a middle schooler. But then ended up, because of a huge youth group was around in a Baptist church, and I partied with a lot of kids, I started going to try and get people off my back and became an active follower of Christ through that. Ended up going to school called Wheaton College because some people told me it was a good school. I didn't know where it was, and went to seminary and did a PhD at University of London. I've been teaching at a place called Covenant College since 2001, and it's a beautiful place on Lookout Mountain, Georgia.
So tell us a little bit about that transition from coming from a Catholic family and now getting involved with not exactly holy rollers, but Baptists, right, of all things.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't have any categories, but it was a very kind of socially, politically, or theologically conservative, maybe even fundamentalist leaning church at the time. It was different for me growing up Catholic. I was so young. I really didn't know anything. In more recent years, last 20 years since my PhD, I now draw on so much Catholic theology for all the good and the harmony. But for me, I just didn't know what it was, and it was a bunch of rituals I didn't understand. And in high school, this youth group was very meaningful because they talked about Jesus in a way I could understand and start to pray and relate. And so it was a bumpy transition for me, for my parents. My parents were great now, but at the time, I'm sure I said a bunch of dumb things and hurtful things. But they weren't. You said they stopped attending church anyway, largely. Well, my father always kept going, but my mom at the time, she stopped with us boys, basically.
And what were her reasons for stopping? To your awareness, you may not know all the reasons.
I'd probably have to let her answer that. But the main thing was, we all just stopped. We stopped going, and so it's still very reputable family and all of that. And so I think it was a shock to them. And I think they were living in denial about some of the stuff I was doing. And as it started to become more public, it created some tensions. And so I think they were happy when I started going to church and in this different setting, just kind of thought, well, although there were odd parts about it.
Yeah. And then digging into that a little bit more, and again, just kind of digging in superficially. That's interesting that you juxtapose the richness of the theology of the Catholic Church and perhaps the richness of the experience in the youth group, right? The more immediate.
Right.
Maybe
Yep.
contrast that a little bit more, and how have you sort of processed that divergence of religious approach?
Yeah. I
Or
mean, I recently in December I had a book called Christian Life that came out, and it's a theology of Christian life. It's not a how-to. It's like, what's the theology behind it? And in that book, near the end, I spend a couple chapters on the importance of ritual and practices. And so that kind of informs how I think about this. I really do think it's interesting you bring up the question, because in many ways at that time, the informality, the immediacy was very attractive. I'm a college professor. I have been for decades, and you find a lot of young people now, that kind of immediacy in that format is not as appealing as some high church things.
Mhm.
And so I just find the whole thing kind of a fascinating thing to explore. And so rituals never save us. Want to be very careful about that. But the reality is all of us are engaged in rituals, whether we know it or not. And that's been part of my work, is to try and think through what's the theology behind it. So how, and what are practices that we do that need to be revised? What are ways that are helpful? And how do rituals either promote or hinder intimacy with God?
Yeah, and I haven't thought about it this way, but even the title of this show and I'm going to call it the symbiotic dichotomy
Mm,
of created in the image of God, building vibrant communities, right? Because
right.
the human experience, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we talk about your work, as you shared with me just briefly before the show. The human experience is, we've got this high calling, we've got this high standard: become ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. But none of us can attain to that standard. And building a vibrant community, as Jesus showed us, involves, having to interact with sinners, right? And so you've got this tension.
Yeah, I mean, and so yeah, I'm trying to think through what you're asking. There is a tension, and
I'm
some
not
of it,
asking really anything. I'm
yeah,
just sort of
yeah,
processing what you're telling
reflecting
me.
on it, and
Yeah.
some of even that, when we take a text like, be perfect, God is perfect, and Paul talks about be imitators of God. It's interesting, the word, and I'm sure you probably know this, but the word perfect is really biblically, it's about fullness or completeness. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily about no sin. This is why Hebrews can say that Jesus became perfect. It
Right.
wasn't, they're not saying he was a sinner and then all of a sudden stopped being a sinner, but he ended up having the fullness and the completeness of the human experience, right? And so in what ways are we to imitate God? Because it would actually be blasphemous to say I'm supposed to imitate God and therefore I should think I'm omnipresent, right? I should be everywhere. I should know everything. I should do everything. And as you were alluding to, that part of my work is to say, no, that's God. That's not us. And we don't even need to feel guilty that we can't be everywhere and know everything and do everything. We've got to get more comfortable being creatures.
Yeah, I want to explore your background a little bit more, but I gotta ask this now before I forget later, because this is a verse that I chew on a lot,
Mm,
and I'd love to get your take on it. The verse is, um, Jesus learned obedience
yeah,
through the things he suffered.
yeah,
Unpack that in the context of how you just
yeah.
unpacked be perfect.
Yeah, it is the kind of way, and I kind of try to unpack that more in the book called You're Only Human, where the humanity of Jesus is very important in the ancient church and our creeds and confessions, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox. For us, Jesus being not just fully God but fully human are equally important. You can't compromise one or the other. And so you find these very uncomfortable statements like in Luke 2:52, where Jesus grew in wisdom, knowledge, stature,
Yeah.
and favor with God and man. You're like, what do you mean? What does that even mean? And I think that's what the author of Hebrews is doing there, that the eternal Son of God knows everything, right? Okay, let's approach it this way. So we know that God knows everything. He's omni, right? Omniscient. He knows everything. So why does the author of Hebrews,
Exists outside of time and space. We
yeah,
can't even begin to he created time and space. Can't even
right,
begin to comprehend what that's like. It's
right.
impossible.
So now think, well, if God knows everything, then why is the author of Hebrews thinks it's such a big deal that we have a sympathetic high priest who knows what it's like to be tempted in all ways as we are, yet without sin.
Yeah.
Because God already knew, right? Well, God always knew, but he knew as God.
Right.
And the remarkable thing is that when the eternal Son of God, sent out of the love of the Father and the power of Spirit, becomes human, now the incarnate Son, so God through the Son, knows these temptations, not just theoretically in terms of all knowledge, but experientially. He knows it now from the human side.
Yeah.
That's remarkable, right? So it's not that God didn't know everything. The way the ancient church would put it is, the Son doesn't cease to be what he was, that is truly God, but he becomes what he was not, is fully human. And in a fully human experience, just bodily, we grow. We can grow in all these kind of ways, and that would include experientially. And that is a powerful statement of God's solidarity with us in Christ.
Well, there's one thing that God doesn't know, dare I say, no, lightning doesn't strike me, and that is what it's like to be not God, what it's like to be separated from God. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, right? My God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, well, because I think that Jesus is truly God, it's part of what's interesting is, what is Jesus saying when he's quoting Psalm 22? And the shortest is a much longer conversation. And there's an article online. It's an academic article I wrote on Psalm 22, if any readers actually care. But short version is, what's interesting is God can't die. God can't eat carrots. God can't sleep. God can't bleed. So what's interesting is, how does God deal with this problem? Well, the God who cannot becomes a creature who can.
Yep.
And so the God who cannot die becomes fully human so he can enter into death in order to overcome it. Because the God of life enters the grave that's never satisfied, and the grave spits him out, and you have new life now. And he leads the captives free. So God can't die, but he can in and through the Son. Something like
So
that.
one more question, and then I want to dive back into your background. I have a dear friend. She's a woman from the Bahamas. My wife and I go to a nursing home every Sunday and twice a month for dinner with this group of lovely people that just look to us for, they actually wanted a spiritual community and family and somebody who knew the Bible to come and talk to them. And we've been doing this for 2 years. And she told me something that I didn't know. Now, my undergrad degree is in theology, and I was an ordained minister. But unlike you, I don't really know theology, right? I mean, I've studied my whole life, but I didn't go and get a PhD at a university with rigor, right? So that's the context I'm asking you this question. She said, and I'd never heard this, and I haven't fully processed it. This was like 2 weeks ago. She said, Jesus breathed forgiveness into creation when he said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And I hadn't considered that. Until that, you had mercy, but you didn't have forgiveness. What's your take on that?
I mean, I think it's a beautiful sounding statement. I'm not sure I would actually agree with it. Because I do think there's forgiveness in the Old Testament. You still have the challenge of God and time and what's going on. And I still think forgiveness is contingent upon Christ crucified, but that doesn't just work for those after, but even it gets placed for before. So, I think she's trying to say something beautiful. I don't know if I'd say it that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, so back to your background, tell us a little bit more then about, you made it sound very casual that, I went to Wheaton and then I got my PhD. Dig into that just a little bit before we go to the break.
Sure. Went to Wheaton College outside of Chicago. Did a degree in philosophy and history, and loved it, and really started to think through. I loved a Christian liberal arts school where trying to think through all of life in terms of God. And then I did 3 years of seminary at a place called Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando, Florida. And then we went overseas and studied in London. I was at University of London, King's College, and studied with a really well-known theologian at the time, Colin Gunton, who since passed, and a historian named Susan Hardman Moore. And just really exploring the Trinity and how the fact that God is triune relates to what it means for us to be human. How do we relate to this God who's triune?
I'm going to right now extend an invitation to have you back to talk about the Trinity in detail. Won't dive into it today.
Sure.
Then after getting that PhD, and what was your thesis on?
My thesis is on a 17th century figure named John Owen. He was a famous Puritan, the head of Oxford University, and he wrote a ton on the Trinity and communion with God and sin, and 24 volumes worth of stuff.
So was this a Puritan pre-US, post in the United States?
No, he was a Puritan at Oxford. He's British. He's English.
Okay.
His whole life. He was one of Oliver Cromwell's chaplains for a little bit, and then opposed Oliver Cromwell, which didn't go well for him, but that's fine. But good for him.
Okay, well, second invite to come back and explore American religious history, right? Because I'm loving this conversation. So moving on then, you completed your PhD. Now you re-enter the real world, from the hallowed ivory towers of academia. Well, you haven't really entered the real world.
So my wife and I, we're interviewing at different places. We flew to this place called Covenant College on Lookout Mountain, Georgia, right above Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's right on the border of Chattanooga and Tennessee, and we love
beautiful area.
Yeah, it's beautiful Christian liberal arts school. And once we visited and talked with faculty and students, we're in love. So we've been here since 2001. We have 2 adult children now who have gone through Covenant, and one's preparing for ministry, and the other's an econ major. And hopefully she won't forget us when we retire. Someone who could actually make money and not just in ministry. I've been working with college students at Covenant since 2001 as a professor of theology.
And what are the titles of some of the courses you teach there?
Yeah, so every student who comes to Covenant, even if they're studying pre-law or chemistry or whatever, everyone takes an Old Testament class, a New Testament, and then 2 classes called Doctrine 1 and 2, which is a year-long overview of theology amid all the other classes they take. And so I'm always teaching some of the Doctrine ones, but I teach a whole semester class on the Trinity, a whole semester class on Christology, or the person work of Christ, and I teach one on faith and suffering. That's an area I've written a lot about, and some other stuff, modern theology.
Well, and it's that faith and suffering really that drew me in now that I'm reflecting on how this meeting came about. So we'll dive into that a little bit more.
Okay.
But I want to, this is fascinating to me given my own background, which I won't waste time. My audience kind of knows it. But so this seems like a practical Christian walk kind of approach. Is this to the broader student body, right? Who's not studying theology, right? Yeah. So is this denominational, or is it non-denominational, the approach at the college?
Yeah, our college is a Presbyterian college, and but the students don't have to be. But yes, since I teach in the Bible and theology department, I am, and so we are kind of unapologetically coming from that perspective, but trying to be as Catholic. Catholic just means universal, grounded in this tradition. So, and trying to just help the students connect the beauty of theology with the beauty of their lives. And it's one of the reasons I love what I do is I get to just watch students' eyes. Some of them are like, why am I taking theology? And then they love it. They love whatever they're going to do. They start to see this is so important to life.
Yeah. So do you have a program for occupational therapy at that college?
Not directly. We have what would be the pre, and then people do we have agreements with other schools. Like we have a 3-2 with Georgia Tech.
Okay.
You do.
I'm asking on behalf of my daughter, who's a senior. She was just.
We have a lot of students who go on to do that, and then they end up with a master's as well as a.
Yeah. She actually was just she was accepted everywhere here in Wisconsin and other schools she applied to, but she just actually enrolled in Carroll College up here, small. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but she's going to be an occupational therapist. Great. Anyway, moving into the break, we're going to have a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into the meat and potatoes of that suffering and faith, interplay, and what it means for us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Kelly Kapic here on Created in the Image of God.
In a world where religions often talk past each other, what if we just sat down and listened? Facets of One is a simple devotional bringing together scripture from the world's faiths, centered on one truth: God is one. From the Bible to the Quran, from Krishna to Christ, each voice speaks in turn, without argument, without division. You don't have to agree on everything. Just be willing to pray, to listen, and to come together. If you're longing for something deeper than noise and division, this is a different kind of conversation. Facets of one, many voices, one God. Will you start a circle?
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God with Kelly Kapic, who is a professor at Covenant College. Did I get that right?
Yeah, great job.
Anyway, I learn as I go, and it's live, as the audience knows. So we were just I was fascinated, and I'm sure the audience was loving this background and this sort of examination of your emerging sensibility and why you've landed where you have at this Presbyterian college. And you mentioned that you cover kind of like fundamentals of theology for every student that comes in, so that they have a grounding, and also some higher level classes for those who pursue that. So, but you have a particular interest in faith and suffering, right? And I raised that verse which you unpacked around Jesus learned obedience through the things he suffered. Fascinating to get your perspective on that. So what is your desire or intent, or what part of what you feel is a calling are you fulfilling by focusing on this topic in particular?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The short version is, I think I mentioned my wife and I got married in 1993. We were married 9 years before we had kids. And then in 2008, my wife was diagnosed with a form of cancer that normally much older people get, like in their 80s. And she had it in her 30s. And we had 2 young kids at the time. And so that was really hard. And then we, after surgeries and etc., she ended up being declared cancer free, and we were so thankful. It was really hard, but we thought, okay, God, we made it through. And then in 2010, she called me from the side of the road, and she was dealing with her leg wasn't working properly, and she didn't know if she could drive home. And from that day to this day, 2026, there's never been a day without pretty massive pain and fatigue for her. And so she deals with chronic pain. If she was on, you would see she's beautiful. You wouldn't know. It's not one of those obvious things, but it's been very real. And with her encouragement, after a number of years, it took us 6 years to get to the Mayo Clinic to figure out what was wrong and all those things. And we know, and the short answer is there's nothing you can do about it. But she encouraged me because I learned by thinking and wrestling through these things. And so I wrote a book called Embodied Hope. And that's me wrestling with pain and suffering. And because I think theology is for life. It's really what it's about. And so I'm wrestling with God, trying to think through these hard questions and practical questions.
So I assume you've studied, deeply into Paul and his journey, because he talks about the messenger of Satan to buffet him, and there's speculation about what his physical challenges were. So what can we learn from some of your theological deepening on this topic, given that you've had to wrestle with it in your personal life, but also looking for answers in the Word of God?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on who I'm talking to, which part. But one of the things I would just encourage your listeners to do is to realize that when people are suffering, they might be asking questions, but they're probably not asking what you think they're saying, even though the words point no way. So people will say, like, I can't believe in God anymore, etc. Very often, if they're coming from a Christian background, it's actually safer to say I can't believe in God. What they're actually saying is, as C.S. Lewis once said, the problem is not that I'm afraid I'm going to not believe in God. I'm afraid I'm going to realize, oh, this is the kind of God you are, which is far more troubling, right? And so one of the problems, and I've sensed, because of this work for the last almost 10 years, I've worked with a group of psychologists and Christian theologians with the John Templeton Foundation, we've been doing research on suffering, and so there's all kinds of interesting data we've developed. But that relates then is Christians, well-meaning Christians, then often try and enter this by giving philosophical arguments like, well, how can a good God, and evil happened? And we think that you're supposed to try and answer that. And you and I should just stop talking is what we should do. Our presence is the important part. And then the last thing I would just say theologically is the way you handle and think through pain and suffering in the world is not with a philosophical answer. It's actually with Jesus, the power of the incarnation, the idea that God enters in to pain and suffering in solidarity with Christ. And the shortest way I can put it is, if you want to know what God thinks about your pain and suffering and maybe even abuse that's happened to you, all of these kind of things, you don't look to a mathematical equation. You don't look to a philosophical thing. You look to the bleeding and weeping and dying Jesus on a cross. And that, you're like, how is that sovereignty? That looks like weakness. And I'm like, well, the weakness of God is made perfect in suffering. And he takes that suffering into a grave and then rises. And so it's remarkable from a Christian perspective that we're able to be brutally honest about how bad and screwed up the world is and in our bodies, and yet still hopeful. And Christians are tempted to just be hopeful and downplay just how screwed up things are. And we don't let people mourn and weep and lament, and that's not great. And some people, when you just mourn and weep and lament, never get to resurrection life and to talk about hope. And the gospel allows you to maintain both, right? Once you get to resurrection hope, it doesn't mean you have to stop talking about how hard it is. Anyways, those are some of the things I would say.
No, deeply profound and moving on those two levels, right? You have the mind and the heart, right? To put it that way.
Sure.
Again, the title of the show, Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities. So I go to, on this topic, I go to verses like, they that love the Lord spoke often one to another, and he would remember them in the day that he makes up his jewels, right? So we're communing with each other, and God's remembering that in the day that he makes up his jewels. But a jewel is formed under intense heat and pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's intellectually for me, is to know this is what God is doing. This is why. This is why God is curating my soul. Right. And I had this guy, Max Stossel, on the show. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He did a show on out in New York, and he's a storyteller, and he tells this one story on YouTube, which is how I found him, about the two babies in the womb. Have you ever seen it?
No.
Where they're twins, and one of them says, do you think there's anything after this? And the other one says, no, there's nothing after this. And I'll shorten this up immensely.
Yeah.
Do you believe in mother? Are you kidding? There's no such thing as mother, right?
Yeah.
And the point being, we're in a womb here.
Yeah.
We're in a womb here, and the rebirth, the resurrection, is entry into a life outside this womb. And if we don't develop in this womb the arms, legs, eyes, ears, lungs that we need, we will not survive, or we will be handicapped. And that pain and suffering is part of the development of those spiritual qualities, those attributes of God, the fruits of the Spirit. You follow me? And without those experiences, and some of us have a la-di-da, sail through unicorns and rainbow life, although we don't know what's really going on and why they have that exterior, right? But, and the minute we compare ourselves to each other, as Paul says, forget it. That's not what you should be doing. Don't compare yourselves among yourselves. You're not wise. So whatever our path is with God, as we become a ruby or a pearl or a diamond, and each of them have different ways in which they're formed, God is working a work in us, right? But that's for me internally. To your point, it's not, sure, if somebody's open to that kind of encouragement, but to your point, being with while they're weeping or suffering, you know what I mean, is sometimes more helpful than explaining this stuff that they probably already know at some level.
Well, and we don't know. The reality is we're tempted you get, someone loses in a horrendous situation, someone loses a child.
Yeah.
And
Can't imagine.
you'll get someone saying, like, I think God did that because he wants to save this nurse or something like that. And you're like, what do you do? Or bring a revival to your church. Well, what happens if a nurse does make a confession and then 4 years later leaves the church, right? Or leaves the faith? Like, you're just talking above our pay grade. And we really are not qualified, nor should we. And the other thing is just the Psalms, which is ancient Israel's songbook, Jesus' songbook. 40% of it is lament.
Yeah.
It is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you, God? Why are you allowing this to happen? And in a lot of American Christianity, we do not have space for lament, and that then distorts our view of God, ourselves, and how we live in this world.
Wow. Yeah, and that's why this experience in the nursing home is so powerful. Just to go there every week and be with them, right? And there's Connie, who's in her 90s, and we've now celebrated 2 birthdays with her, and we see her capacity diminishing, and then there's Rebecca from the Bahamas that I mentioned, and then there's Loretta, who she's a double amputee of her legs above the knees, right? But she's so positive. She expresses no doubt that if it weren't for that situation, she wouldn't be as close to God as she was, and who knows what she's been doing. And she had kind of a turbulent past, but she's volunteering that, and she's providing that inspiration, and we're benefiting from it. And just the, and I was kind of in the youth ministry arena when I was a minister, and I did summer camps in South Africa and Scotland, and I also did these big events like Behind the Iron Curtain, where we brought in worshipers into Poland when it was illegal behind the Iron Curtain. I'm actually a little older than you and older than I look, and for 8 days we worshiped because they wanted the valuta, and we brought it, and it was illegal, but we worked with Paul Orbis, the government tourist agency, to illegally bring 180 people in to worship God behind the Iron Curtain. It was awesome, right? Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to do was work with geriatrics, right? I mean, I'm like, no, you handle that, right? But at this stage in my life, it is so enriching to just be with these people who are at that stage where they're working out that passage as it comes closer, to transitioning from this life into the next life. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's, you probably know memento mori, this ancient Christian practice of, concentrating on death, thinking about death. There, sometimes people see this medieval art, and I think it's a mistake where they'll see a skull on a desk and you're like, what kind of crazy? But actually the idea is like, there is something healthy about being confronted with our mortality. It's the same, like, you've probably heard, these nightly prayers for people in the primer books in early America. Like, now I lay me head down to sleep. If the Lord, my soul, I pray the Lord, my soul to keep. Yeah, I pray the Lord, my soul to take. If I die before I wake, like, we say it and we don't even think, like, that is insane. Oh, but and we would never allow our children to say a prayer like that today. Yeah. And so we live in this mythical structure where we don't understand. And when you don't take death seriously, yes, there's a perverse version that could go bad, but actually by like going and being in the presence of people who there's no denial, it means you stop denying. And part of what then happens is because you and I navigate this world, we think, well, I'm irritated at that person, I'm bitter, I'll get to it one day, right? Or whatever it is. But no, there's like, or I'll get to God one day. But the immediacy allows us to say, no, today's the day of salvation. Today's the day for me to talk to God. Today's the day for me to try and make something right with someone I've been cruel to, whatever it is. There's something about, and today is the day I enjoy this grapefruit because it tastes so good, and I don't assume I will have this day forever. Yeah. Well, in this weekly meeting, we've had 3 or 4 of the participants pass on over the course of the 2 years, and people come and people go. Wow. And in fact, one session, like about a month ago, we're all there, the doors open in the library where we meet, and here they come with a stretcher, covered over, passing right by, and then and everybody's like, oh, I wonder who that is. And in this facility together. So it's it's very immediate to us, but it has a potency. We've also felt the presence of those from our group who have passed on from the next world, not to get woo-woo here, but and we've felt like an infusion of positive energy. And now that I think about it, and I had not actually thought about this, I actually lost both my sisters, my younger and my older sister, to one of them of cancer and one of them killed by a drunk motorist.
Yeah.
During this time frame, while we've been, I just now correlated that those two things happened while I was, and I don't know how the power of that, of the help of being involved with these people to get through that. And it's this it's this community that you're talking about, being with people in their suffering, and also the lament.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as you know, like, you go to historic churches around the world, Australia, England, America, and there's graveyards right by them. And every day, every time you'd go to church, you pass a graveyard. And now what we've done is we've so separated that, that we do everything we can to keep ourselves away from death. And that can distort our understanding of humanity and the life we've been given.
Wow. All right. So moving on from death but thank you. This deep reflection, I can't thank you enough for, and I hope the audience is getting as much out of it as I am. So here's this theological question that I told you I would raise with you, given your background and experience. I'm not gonna, well, I guess I'll call this a little pet idea, right? So, but it's because I've spent so much time studying the book of Genesis, the two trees, what that means. I've, if I've brought scholarship to any topic, it's those opening chapters of Genesis and the way that the word desire is woven in. Eve desired the fruit. Sin has desire for Cain. Part of the curse of Eden is your desire will be to your husband and he will rule over you. I actually got into this on the topic of, marriage, back when I was a minister and divorce was happening, and my wife divorced me. I'm now remarried very happily with 2 children. But it was the most, and you don't know this, my audience does. My parents divorced when I was 8. I was kidnapped when I was 9. The reason I was in Sweden as a kid, my dad smuggled us out of the country. I was separated from both parents for 2 years. After 2.5 years, the Supreme Court of Sweden gave me and my 2 sisters back to our mother, who was an alcoholic, which is why my dad did it. And that didn't end well either. So part of my journey and suffering comes from those early experiences. But that's why I dove deeply into when my own marriage was failing, because this was the one thing I would never do. The demon that haunted me was, I will never get divorced.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, but anyway, the point is, I've spent a lot of time in the book of Genesis, the 2 trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Paul has this statement in Hebrews where he says, you are not weaned. You're immature. You're drinking milk. And you should be teachers, but you're not. You need to be taught. You should be mature enough. You need strong meat, but strong meat belongs to those who, by reason of use, have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. And this little pet idea is Paul flips the script. Jesus flipped the script on everything. My view of the prodigal son parable is Jesus is flipping the script on Cain and Abel. The good son becomes the bad son. The good son is jealous of the bad son. And the story of the prodigal son is really more about the father, how the father treats the children. And it unpacks and lets the Cain and Abel story breathe in a different way. That's my theory about that. The Good Samaritan flips the script on who's good and who's bad. Jesus flipped the script on everything. He turned the tables over, right? So that you'd have to look at things differently. So Paul is here, in my view, flipping the script on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But this gets to some deep theological questions about the fall and whatnot. My point is this. Jesus is the second Adam, right?
Mhm.
Whatever that means. but he so completely made everything new
Mm.
that we are now at the stage where we are supposed to be eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Our path forward as mature Christians involves not just being created in the image of God, but becoming like God and discerning good and evil, with, of course, the help of the Holy Spirit and the Word of God, both the written revelation and Jesus, the Word of God, and creation itself, which is the great manifestation of who and what God is, our great laboratory. If the Holy Writings are the text,
Mm.
the school books, creation itself is the laboratory. And Paul is saying, you need to dig in and figure this out. By reason of use, you must exercise your senses to discern good and evil. So what do you make of that thought idea? Because it raises all kinds of theological problems.
Yeah, I mean, you just said a lot, so I'm not sure which part to respond. I do think as Christians, we receive the Holy Spirit and we look to the Word. And the idea is that we should be maturing in that faith, and that includes discerning good and evil. But I think that even that is going to be based, like you kept saying, on Scripture, trying to imagine what that is. And maybe I'm not understanding which are the problems you're concerned with, or what.
Well, first of all, God said, you shall not eat of it. So
Right.
it was a temptation, right? And we failed at that time. But of course, it was always God's purpose. God always knew, because he gave us free will and autonomy. He gave us sovereignty on this planet.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it that way, but I get what you're saying. I do. He did make us not God, and he gave us a will to engage. I don't think there is any sovereignty but God's sovereignty, in the sense of we live, move, and have our being in him, and some of those things. So it might just be difference of how we see that.
Well, so it's a temporary sovereignty, right? And it's limited when, and by the way, I'm my training is a fundamentalist, so obviously the Bible is full of metaphor and poetry and simile, and but I also take a lot of it literally. And so he put I have the sun and moon behind me on the wall, because he put the greater and lesser lights in heaven to rule the day and rule the night.
Yeah.
And we must submit to the light. So our sovereignty extends up to those heavenly lights. And that's why, one of the reasons why he called the Tower of Babel, right? Confusion, because the tower to heaven, he said, you will not do that. You will not extend your sovereignty, right? Lucifer was cast down to the earth, right?
All right.
So, but within that, up to that, we have full authority, because he said he put everything under our feet that is on this planet. We have sovereignty on this planet. That's what I'm getting at. So within a context, we have the authority to do whatever the hell we want, and we do, which is why we have so much misery.
Right. Yeah, it probably just is an example of maybe where we're using words a little differently than one another. I do think the Bible seems to uphold, I would say, divine sovereignty from beginning to end, and it also upholds human responsibility from beginning and end. And as you probably know, for 2,000 years, theologians have wrestled with how do those two fit together, and that's the great, because we do live, move, and have our being in God. Medieval theologians talk about primary and secondary cause. There's a sense in which the only reason we don't have sovereignty, because if God doesn't sustain us, we can't do anything. And yet that doesn't mean that God is doing the thing, right? So there is this sense in which everything happens under his sovereignty, but it doesn't mean that everything that happens God thinks is good, right? Anyways, there's a bunch of distinctions we'd want to make, but I think I get what you're trying to say, just in terms of we have responsibility, our actions matter, and God is calling us to, going back to the title of your podcast, to image him, to be like him. And in the ancient Near Eastern world, what would happen is the kings would create little images of themselves, or big ones. They'd be like 10 feet tall, and they'd send them out to the extent to the farthest regions of their territory. And so the idea would be you'd come upon an image of Pharaoh and go, oh, this is Pharaoh's land. this represents his presence. And so we are supposed to represent God's presence, reign, and his rule. And there are ways that we can be like God and ways that we act that are very unlike God as we image him.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you, where are you growing next? What's next on the horizon? Are there more books out there? And also tell us a little bit about the books that you might recommend to the audience, where they can get them, so that people can engage more deeply with your perspective on things. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Kelly Kapic on Created in the Image of God.
What do ancient prophecies, the collapse of empires, and the Beatles have in common? In the people of the sign, truth is revealed to be far stranger than fiction. Wade Franson weaves together a childhood torn apart, world-shifting events, and the music of a generation, on a journey that's as personal as it is historic. In the hardness of the heart, the quest deepens. Faith and doubt collide. Through shattering setbacks and unexpected miracles, Wade invites you to question, to seek, to forgive, and ultimately discover what truly matters. This is a story of reconciliation, resilience, and a universal longing to understand the mystery of God. Then, in The Rod of Iron, the relentless search for coherence comes to a breathtaking conclusion. From the Tower of Babel to science's furthest frontiers, Wade connects the mysteries of the past to the unity of a possible future, and to the deepest longings of the human soul. Wade Franson's trilogy is a riveting odyssey, exploring faith, science, forgiveness, and the music that ties it all together. Discover the story where every puzzle leads to a greater truth. Start your journey today.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God. We're wrapping up. We're running into a wall, but we have just enough time for Kelly Kapic to tell us a little bit about where he's growing next, the stuff he's working on, and how you can engage with him and his material, and maybe even contact him if he's willing to share that.
Thanks. Yeah, to know more about me, you can look on Amazon, or just Kelly, Kelly Kapic, Kapic.com. There's a website, and churches and stuff and conferences. There's a way to invite me to speak. But yeah, I'm right now. The three projects that are all coming out, have come out or are coming out, are this more academic volume, or for pastors, called Christian Life, and I'm exploring the theology, not to do like, here's how you be a Christian, but it's more like, what has God done? And I'm really exploring the love of God, the grace of God, the fellowship of God, and what that means. And there's a lot in there about ecclesia, which is your emphasis on community. It's really important. So and the one thing I'll say, there's so much I'd like to say on that, but is the surprising thesis there that might surprise people is the argument is Jesus, from a Christian perspective, Jesus is not just who we worship, but he's the lead worshiper. And that second part is not something a lot of Christians always have unpacked, but it's really important. He's not just who we worship, but the lead worshiper. And then
when we have you back on the show to talk about the Trinity, I want to dive into that, exactly that.
Yeah, it's a biggie. And then you can see my books online, but the other one I would mention that's coming out is called When the Journey Hurts. And that's an exploration of faith and suffering. And this is with a psychologist and another theologian based on our John Templeton research. And so we're trying to combine psychology, theology, and really pastoral things. And that's really for laity. But for my older works, people can go online. I've written a lot about just how exhausted we are in a book called Your Own Human. And so any listener who's really tired, but feels like God expects more from them, my guess is that could be liberating.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for being on the show. And we just have 1 or 2 minutes left. What final message would you like to leave with the audience?
Oh, yeah, that's great. Maybe it relates to the last book I just mentioned. I really think it's important to realize that the goal, if you're a Christian, the goal of the Christian life is not to become superhuman. It's just to be fully human. And we were made to be human, is to be in communion with God, communion with our neighbor, and rightly communing or in relationship to the rest of the world. Loving God, loving neighbor, loving the creation. And Christianity at its best is simply trying to reconnect you into that communion in and through Christ and by the Spirit.
Well, thank you so much. I will conclude by adding my little tagline. As the audience knows, you
Yeah.
were created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. Stay tuned for the sneak peek of next week's show. And Kelly will create a little sneak peek from snippets of this show so that we'll promote you in advance. And I will reach out to have you back on the show. I know the audience wants to know more. I want to know more. And hopefully you'll be able to squeeze that into your extremely busy schedule. Thank you so much for being here, and it's been truly a pleasure.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk to everyone soon.
Next week on Created in the Image of God. Sunday, June 21st at 7 a.m. U.S. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Steve Chalk, Baptist minister, author, and founder of Oasis Charitable Trust. He reflects on faith in action and why the gospel must be expressed through justice, reconciliation, and community transformation. From church and public life to the challenge of building a more compassionate and inclusive society. And then on Tuesday, June 23rd at 8 p.m. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Gary Rensburg. Scholar of the Hebrew Bible and Jewish history, he explores the language, history, and literary design of Scripture, and how the Bible reveals itself as a carefully crafted work of remarkable depth. From ancient Hebrew and the Dead Sea Scrolls to a richer understanding of the world behind the biblical text. Join us live this week, Tuesday and Sunday, Created in the Image of God.